Well, hi, thanks for joining us on this journey through the book of Acts. This is going to be a spiritual journey over the next 28 days, and each day we're going to take a different look at a different chapter from the book of Acts. And we're going to look at what does it mean to go beyond, and what does it mean for the first church to go beyond throughout the book of Acts. And hopefully from their experience, from their story, we can discover what going beyond looks like for us today. And on this journey, I'm going to be joined by a number of different friends. I'm going to lead off on Mondays each week, and then different friends are going to join me throughout the week and give their thoughts on the chapter that we're reading. And I'll come back every so often on another day in the week as well. And I hope you'll be a part of this. I'm excited for what God's going to do through these devotions in our church over the next 28 days. Well, I'm looking at Acts chapter 1 today. I hope you've read the chapter. Here's my thoughts on what I saw as I went through it. And to start off, I want to ask you this question. Have you ever tried to do something all by yourself? When my family and I, we lived in Calgary, and we bought a house that needed some work. It needed some renovation. And my wife and I, Britton, we were working quite often opposite shift work. So she was working nights, I was working days, trying to take care of a young family at the same time. Our kids were little, and so they weren't much help in renovating this house. And often I would end up by myself in the basement, renovating that basement while Britton was at work. And you know what? It was a lonely endeavor, and it was quite difficult. Have you ever tried to hang a 4x8 sheet of drywall all by yourself? It's almost impossible. When Britton was home or my dad was visiting, it was a lot more fun, and we got a lot more done when we did it. I have found in my life that things are a lot easier and turn out a lot better when done with someone else. We were created to live within community. We are better together and accomplish far more together than we ever can apart. In Acts chapter 1, verses 12 to 26, the disciples are gathered together to pray. Verse 14 says, they all met together and were constantly united in prayer. As we go through Acts, we're going to see two things. We're going to see, first of all, that every significant movement of the church flows out of prayer. And the second thing we're going to find is that every significant movement takes place within community. The disciples are praying as a group. They've gathered to seek God's presence together. And Jesus told them that where two or three are gathered, that God is present, that God is in agreement with them when they can agree in prayer. And the disciples took Jesus at his word. And so after Jesus has left, they gather in prayer. Why? Because they desperately want Jesus to be back among them. The community described in Acts chapter 1 does not just involve people, it involves God as well. That we gather together to pray, but God is present, and that's an amazing picture to have as you gather with someone to pray, is that God is actually there with you. As the disciples are praying, they realize that their community isn't complete, that there are a disciple short because of Judas's betrayal and his death. And so they ask God, who should we include in our community? Who should be that 12th disciple? And God points to Matthias, who becomes the 12th disciple. This is the only time we hear about Matthias. Why does God dedicate part of his book on the church to writing about Matthias? It's interesting to note that nothing really happens in the book of Acts until after Matthias is chosen. The Holy Spirit doesn't come until there's a 12th disciple and the community is complete. I wonder if the principle that Luke is trying to convey to us is that the mission and the movement of God begins when we place ourselves in community. God invites us into his mission, that's community, and his mission isn't a solo endeavor. It's not just you and God working together, that you're supposed to surround yourself with other people. God's intention is for us to live in community and be on mission together in a community with him and other disciples. So the question is, who are you living in community with as you're on mission? With whom have you chosen to share your life? Who do you gather with regularly to pray and listen to God with? Who are you on mission with God with? If you aren't in a community like the one described in Acts 1, maybe it's time to talk with God about why. Ask God to point you towards a community where you fit, just as Messiah fit with the 12. It wasn't just the disciples who live on community together. If we read verse 15, we read that there was 120 people who were gathered together to pray. The entire first church gathered to pray and live in community. And we're going to read more about that tomorrow in Acts chapter 2. Out of that community came a movement that is still changing the world. I wonder what we might be missing because we aren't living in community. Praying and living on mission together in community was normal for the first church. Is it normal for us today? If it was, I wonder if we might see movement take place in our church like we see in the book of Acts.